Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today, especially on this very rainy day, for our Authors Series event with Ann Lee, Demos Senior Fellow, and author of What Can the U.S. Learn from China, who will discuss her book and also discuss what to expect in terms of U.S.-China relations in 2012. We're pleased to be holding this event at Demos for the first time and want to thank them for their very warm hospitality. I'm Patricia Ellis, president of the Women's Foreign Policy Group, which promotes women's leadership and women's voices on pressing international issues of the day, such as China. Things regarding China are always timely, but they are especially timely right after President Obama's State of the Union address, where he announced the creation of a new trade enforcement unit tasked with investigating unfair trade practices in countries like China. And in just 2 months, and the new leader of China will be meeting in Washington to discuss bilateral, regional, and global relations at a time when there's lots of tension in the relationship, tension that includes the value of the Chinese currency, China's relations with Iran, the stepped-up U.S. presence in the Asia and Pacific, to mention just a few. The Authors Series is one of our favorite series, and it's very popular. And recently in New York, this is the third one we've done in New York recently, we had Robin Wright speaking about the Arab Spring. We had Pam Constable speaking about Pakistan. And today we're very fortunate to have Ann Lee to deal with China. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ann Lee. As I mentioned, she's a senior fellow at Demos. She focuses on global economics and finance. She was formerly an investment banker, a hedge fund partner. She is frequently a media commentator. She also is an adjunct professor of economics and finance at NYU, and also was a visiting professor at Peking University. And during that time, she acted as an advisor to Chinese economic officials, as well as to several large Chinese asset management firms. Ann was educated at UC Berkeley, Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs, and Harvard Business School. After Ann finishes speaking, we'll go to Q&A, which will be followed by a book signing. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Ann Lee.
Thank you, Patricia, for that very kind introduction. And thank you all for showing up to listen to such a serious topic, because I know that sex, money, and violence is what sells, and unfortunately my book is missing all three. But I am very humbled to stand here and discuss my book with all of you. I'm often asked, why did I write this book? And the short answer is that I really cared about this country, and I was very concerned about the direction that it was heading. This concern really started back in 2005, when I was still working on Wall Street, trading credit derivatives and bonds at a large hedge fund. And that was when I started to see the toxic assets that had caused the global financial crisis. It was already apparent as early as 2005 that the deals were very irregular. And when I tried to raise this concern with regulators at the SEC, I was not received well. And so when it became apparent to me that they weren't going to do anything about it, that was when I decided to leave Wall Street, because I felt that the financial markets were becoming much too risky and much too dangerous. Having seen previous bubbles during my career, I realized that this one was going to be much more extreme and more dangerous than the previous ones. And so that was when I decided to go into academia and proceed to write and discuss some of the issues that I saw brewing throughout the financial system, as well as in some of the regulations that were not doing its job. And my work in academia brought me to Peking University, where I was teaching finance and economics in 2008 when the credit crisis started to unravel. And it was then that the Chinese government officials didn't have anyone to turn to. They didn't really know what was going on. And so, having had experience on Wall Street, I became invited to discuss and advise them on various issues. And it was through this dialogue that I was able to get a lot of insights in terms of how they thought about their economy and how they approached the world. And so it's these insights that I want to share with you in this book. And a lot of them I felt really were applicable because if you recall, China was merely an agrarian society, a completely backward society just 30 years ago. And then suddenly they became the second largest economy in the world. In fact, where they come from just is so humbling because more people died of starvation under this Communist Party rule than people died in World War II. So what exactly did they do that allowed them to become so dynamic? And so I felt that these ideas would be translatable into other nations to help the U.S. become more dynamic again, and many other places around the world. And although I understand that these two are very different countries, I'm suggesting that there are only elements that make sense because people are the same around the world. And what they did was that they were able to set aside their ideology that did not work for them and learn to incorporate very practical solutions to help them get the results that they were seeking. And so this book is really about having an open mind, about not letting certain ideas and preconceived notions block us from being able to try out new ideas. And so even though this book covers a lot of different things about what China is doing, I know I don't have enough time here to go into all of it, but I'd like to share a couple major themes that I think are particularly relevant in a presidential election year. For one, I discussed the idea of needing more meritocracy and democracy. Today, I would describe our nation as having a crisis of leadership because poll after poll is showing that our politicians have very low approval ratings. 60 Minutes recently announced that Congress has only a 9% approval rating. And it is no wonder that Occupy Wall Street has been spreading like wildfire. This is a very dangerous trend because if the government is not seen as legitimate by enough of the people, it may be forced or resort to more drastic action in order to maintain the status quo. And we're already seeing signs of this, right? President Obama signed a bill into law on New Year's Eve saying that all Americans can be detained by the military without trial or evidence. This is very disconcerting and an incursion in our civil rights. Also, the recent news about SOPA and about being able to take down websites also without necessarily evidence or trial. So I believe more than ever we need to get the right people in place in order to lead this country. And so what can we learn from China in this regard, especially since many Americans think of China as a dictatorship? Well, it's not entirely accurate because oftentimes if you ask people outside of China what they think of the leadership,